I moved to Oakridge Estates for the peace, a quiet, picturesque neighborhood with neatly manicured lawns, winding cul-de-sacs, and a homeowners association that promised community harmony. At least, that's what the brochure said. It all seemed perfect, until I met Judy Calloway. Judy wasn't just on the HOA board. She was the HOA board. President, secretary, treasurer, and self-appointed sheriff of neighborhood aesthetics. Imagine a woman in her late 50s, bottle blonde hair teased half a foot high, and the permanent expression of someone who just found out her salad was missing dressing. She drove a white Lexus SUV like it was a squad car and had a clipboard, surgically attached to her hand, always on patrol for violations against the sacred Oakridge Homeowners Association bylaws. I didn't think much of her at first. My house, a modest but charming ranch-style home, had just the right amount of curb appeal to keep me under her radar. That is, until the solar panels. I installed them on a Friday. A smooth, matte black set of high-efficiency panels on my roof facing the street. I was proud of them. Energy savings, environmental benefits. What was not to love? The answer arrived Monday morning in the form of an official-looking envelope shoved into my mailbox. Notice of non-compliance, dear homeowner, your recent installation of solar panels violates Oakridge HOA aesthetic guidelines, Sector 7, subsection B. The panels are visible from the street and do not conform to the community's uniform aesthetic standards. Immediate correction is required. Failure to comply may result in fines and further action. Best regards, Judith Calloway, HOA president. I scoffed. This had to be a joke. What was I supposed to do? Install invisible solar panels? I decided to take the diplomatic route and walked over to Judy's house. She lived 3 doors down in a cream-colored McMansion with an aggressively symmetrical garden. Every bush was trimmed into a perfect sphere, and a wooden sign on her porch read, "Live, Laugh, Love," in ominous cursive. I barely knocked before the door swung open. "Ah, Mr. Langston," she smiled in a way that made my skin itch. "I assume you're here about the violation." "Yes, Judy. Mrs. Calloway," she corrected. "Right. Of course." I forced a polite smile. "Mrs. Calloway, I wanted to discuss the solar panels." "There's nothing to discuss," she chirped. "They're an eyesore." "An eyesore?" I blinked. They're state-of-the-art, high-efficiency panels. They're black, sleek. "Ugly," she interrupted. "The Oakridge aesthetic is classic." "You wouldn't install a spaceship door on a Victorian house, would you?" "This isn't a Victorian house." "The rule is clear," she said with the unwavering authority of someone who had never been wrong in her own mind. "No. Visible solar panels. You have until next week to remove them." I stared at her. "Judy? Mrs. Calloway, this is ridiculous," she sighed dramatically. "I tried to warn you, Mr. Langston. The rules exist for a reason." And with that, she shut the door in my face. That should have been the end of it. Maybe I could have fought it through proper channels, argued my case, or found a loophole. But I underestimated how far Judy was willing to go. It started small. A week later, I received a $50 fine for excessive lawn height. I mowed it the next day. Then, a $75 fine for unauthorized trash bin placement. Apparently my bins were 2 inches too close to the curb. Then a $100 fine for improper mailbox color. Every time I complied, another fine appeared. And every time I asked about my appeal on the solar panel ruling, Judy gave me the same tight-lipped smile. "The board is reviewing it," she'd say. I'd never seen this so-called board. As far as I could tell, the HOA consisted entirely of Judy, her clipboard, and whatever vendetta she had against personal freedom. Things escalated. One morning, I stepped outside to find my trash cans missing. Stolen. I checked my security camera footage, and sure enough, at 2:13 a.m. Judy, in a full bathrobe and slippers, had dragged them off my property like a feral raccoon. I confronted her. She shrugged. The board determined they were non-compliant. You may repurchase HOA-approved bins for $150 each. "Judy," I said, barely containing my rage, "this is harassment." She gasped theatrically. "Are you threatening me?" Oh, she was good. Every interaction with her was like wrestling a pig in mud, except the pig had a law degree and a superiority complex. Then came the breaking point. One morning I woke up to find my solar panels white, not gone, painted. Every single panel had been covered in thick, white latex house paint, rendering them completely useless. I stood in my yard, mouth agape, staring at my ruined panels. And then, like clockwork, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. Notice of resolved non-compliance, dear homeowner. Your solar panels have been corrected to comply with Oakridge HOA aesthetic guidelines. You are now in good standing. No further action required. Best regards, Judith Calloway, HOA president. I saw red. This was war. Judy had finally overplayed her hand, and she had no idea what was coming next. I stood in my yard, fists clenched, staring at my white solar panels, useless under the morning sun. The paint had dried overnight, a thick, uneven coat that had turned my energy-efficient investment into a sad, chalky mess. This wasn't just a petty fine or a stolen trash bin. Judy had destroyed my property. I stormed over to her house barely, restraining the urge to rip her perfectly symmetrical hydrangeas out of the ground. The door opened before I could knock. She'd been waiting. "Ah, Mr. Langston." Her voice dripped with faux concern. "I see you noticed the resolution of your violation." I held up her letter, my fingers nearly tearing the paper. "You painted my solar panels," she gasped, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. "I didn't paint anything." I blinked. "Judy, your signature is on the notice." Her lips curled into a smirk. "Yes, because the board resolved your non-compliance. Your panels were in violation. Now they're not." I took a deep breath. "You vandalized my property." "Oh, don't be dramatic," she huffed. "It's just paint." I stared at her, momentarily speechless. Just paint? This woman had committed felony-level property damage with the confidence of someone ordering a non-fat latte. "You're paying for the damages." Judy's smile widened. "Oh, I don't think so. The HOA has full legal immunity in matters of compliance enforcement." I felt my eye twitch. "You made that up." "It's in the bylaws." I didn't have the bylaws memorized, but I knew. Judy had them rewritten every year, ensuring every loophole benefited her. "I'll sue," she laughed. "Oh, please, Mr. Langston. By the time your case reaches court, you'll be buried in HOA violations. Your best option is to let this go." I turned without another word. I needed a plan. Step 1, find a way to take her down. Judy thrived on technicalities. The only way to beat her was to use them against her. I spent the next 4 hours combing through the HOA bylaws, looking for anything I could weaponize. That's when I found it. Buried in the fine print, under Bylaw 13, Section D, Energy Compliance Standards, was a single sentence. Any modifications to a homeowner's energy infrastructure must be approved by a licensed contractor and documented with the city permit office. Judy had destroyed my solar panels, without a permit. I grinned. Step 2, make it hurt. The next morning, I drove to the city permit office and filed a formal complaint. I provided photos, the HOA's own notice, and a written statement. The clerk barely glanced at my papers before nodding. "Oh yeah," she said. "That's illegal." An investigation was opened immediately. By afternoon, a city inspector was at Judy's house. I watched from my porch as she greeted him, clipboard in hand. Her confidence lasted all of 5 minutes. Then, the inspector showed her the complaint file. Judy's face turned the color of expired yogurt. Step 3, watch her squirm. The city slapped her with a $12,000 fine for unauthorized modification of private property, plus an order to restore my panels at her expense. It was glorious, but Judy wasn't done. No, she came back swinging. The next day I received a lawsuit. Filed under Oakridge Estates HOA versus Langston, it accused me of malicious defamation and disrupting community harmony. Judy was trying to bankrupt me. Step 4, fight fire. With fire, I wasn't alone. My battle with Judy had drawn attention. Other neighbors started coming forward. "I got fined $200 for hanging wind chimes," one woman said. She made me repaint my house because the shade of beige was too warm, a man grumbled. She took my lawn gnome, someone whispered. Judy had terrorized Oakridge Estates for years, and now that someone had finally stood up to her, the floodgates opened. We formed a coalition. If Judy wanted a legal fight, she'd get one. 37 homeowners signed a petition to dissolve the HOA Step 5, deliver the final blow. We held a community vote. The turnout was overwhelming. 72% of Oakridge Estates wanted Judy gone. At the next HOA meeting, held in Judy's own living room, she sat at the head of the table, smiling. "This meeting is now in session," she said. I raised my hand. Motion to dissolve. "The HOA!" The room erupted. Judy's smile flickered. "That's seconded," someone shouted. Judy slammed her gavel. "You can't vote!" The ballots were cast. The results were read aloud. HOA dissolved. Judy froze. "No," she whispered. The board she controlled, the rules she wrote, all gone in an instant. The neighbors cheered. Judy stormed out, but not before the city inspector handed her another fine, this time for misuse of HOA funds. The great reign of Judith Calloway was over, or so we thought. That night I heard a noise, a faint scraping outside my house. I checked my security camera. Judy standing in my yard with a can of paint. I watched, horrified, as she slowly approached my house, this time aiming for my front door. I grabbed my phone, and just as she raised the brush, the police arrived. Red and blue lights lit up my yard. Judy froze, paintbrush dripping in one hand, a gallon of historic Oakridge beige in the other. 2 officers stepped out of their patrol car, one shining a flashlight directly at her. "Ma'am, put the brush down," the officer commanded. Judy's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She finally settled on a smile, one of those tight, desperate ones people wear when trying to pretend everything is fine. "Oh, officers, this is all just a misunderstanding." She laughed, a sound that belonged in a horror movie. "I was just, conducting an inspection." I stepped onto the porch, arms crossed. "At 1 a.m? Judy spun toward me, her eyes wild. "You set me up." One of the officers sighed. "Sir, do you know this woman?" "Unfortunately, yes." "Check the security footage." I gestured toward my camera. "She was about to vandalize my house, again." The officers exchanged a look. One of them turned to Judy. "Ma'am, have you been drinking tonight?" Judy stiffened. "How dare you? I am Judith Calloway. I have run this neighborhood for 15 years. "Yeah," I muttered. "That's the problem." The officer ignored me. "Ma'am, we have multiple complaints about your behavior over the last few months. You've been fined, removed from the HOA, and now you're trespassing on private property." Judy's jaw clenched. "This is my neighborhood. I built this community." The officer sighed again, clearly over it. "Ma'am, put the paint down." Judy's nostrils flared, and then, against all logic, she threw the paintbrush at my face. I dodged, but splatter still hit my shirt. The officers didn't hesitate. "Ma'am, turn around, hands behind your back." The handcuffs clicked into place. Judy shrieked, "You can't do this! I am the law!" The officers didn't argue. They guided her, still ranting, into the back of the squad car. Before they drove off, she glared at me through the window, seething. "You'll regret this, Langston." I wiped a speck of beige paint off my cheek and smirked. "I already don't." The car pulled away. The reign of Judy was over. The next morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word spread fast. By noon, a small crowd had gathered in front of my house. "Is it true?" Mrs. Henderson from 2 streets over whispered. "She's really gone?" I grinned. "Arrested for trespassing, vandalism, and harassment." A cheer went up. Without. Judy, Oakridge Estates changed overnight. The fear was gone. People finally decorated their homes how they wanted. Bright blue doors popped up. Wind chimes jingled. Lawn gnomes made a triumphant return. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive. But Judy wasn't done embarrassing herself just yet. The trial came 2 months later. It was supposed. To be a small case, simple trespassing, a slap on the wrist. But Judy, being Judy, insisted on representing herself. It was a spectacle. She ranted about community standards, accused the judge of bias, and at one point cross-examined herself. "Did you intend to commit vandalism, Mrs. Calloway?" she asked, herself in a high-pitched voice. Then, switching tones, she answered, "Absolutely not. I was merely upholding the values of Oakridge Estates." The courtroom went silent. Even the judge looked stunned. Judy was found guilty, fined $5,000. Given community service, ordered to pay for my solar panel repairs, and the cherry on top, banned from holding any HOA-related positions for life. The final insult? The judge assigned her community service hours in Oakridge Estates, which meant every weekend, Judy was out there picking up trash, wearing an orange vest, while the very neighbors she used to terrorize watched from their porches. It was beautiful. A month later, I came home to find an envelope in my mailbox. For a second, I had a horrible flashback to Judy's old violation notices. But this wasn't from her. It was a petition, signed by most of the neighborhood. They wanted me to be the new HOA president. I laughed out loud. I grabbed a pen and, under the signature section, wrote 2 words, "Absolutely not." Oakridge Estates didn't need another dictator. It needed freedom. We kept the HOA dissolved. No more fines. No more nonsense. And every morning I sipped my coffee on my porch, enjoying the view of my restored solar panels, while Judy begrudgingly picked up trash in front of my house. Poetic justice at its finest. 3 months later, Judy put her house up for sale. I should have been thrilled, but something felt off. Sure enough, one evening, I saw a real estate agent showing a couple around her property. And who were the buyers? My parents. I nearly choked on my drink. I called my mom immediately. "You're buying Judy's house?" She laughed. "Well, the price was great and we figured we'd move closer to you." "Mom, she's a nightmare. Don't worry, sweetie." I could hear her smirking. "I've dealt with worse." The sale went through. 2 weeks later, my mother called me, cackling. "Guess what I just did?" "What?" "I painted the house neon blue," I wheezed. "You did not." "Oh, I did. And you should have seen Judy's face when she came to say goodbye." It turned out nothing could infuriate Judy more than seeing her perfect house ruined by someone even more stubborn than her. I walked over that evening just in time to see Judy loading the last of her things into a moving truck. She shot me. One last glare. "Enjoy your disaster of a neighborhood, Langston." I grinned. "Enjoy your retirement, Judy." She huffed, climbed into her Lexus, and sped away. For good. And that was the last time anyone saw Judith Calloway. Oakridge Estates thrived without her. The community grew closer. The first summer after her departure, we held a block party, the first one allowed in years. Someone even made a piñata shaped like Judy's Lexus. Life was good, and every morning I still wake up, step onto my porch, and enjoy the sight of my jet-black solar panels soaking up the sun, all without a single fine in sight. The war was over, and I had won.